Tony Davis.
Tony Hauser.
The Tony and Tony Show, episode 34. Yeah. So yes. Yeah.
And for this episode.
Yeah, and with this episode.
We are on product learning with who else? A Phil Factor article.
Of course we're on product learning. Sometimes we go on other websites and we still invite everyone to submit their website so we can check them out. But
yeah,
today,
this is a new thing we're thinking about. We may need to review product learning articles, but if you've got, an
something interesting
topic, please get in touch.
But for now,
yes, Phil Factor is talking about defining and using multiple Flyway environments in TOML.
Yeah, and that is an interesting topic because we talked about this before. We talked about that I might or might not, because I'm now too late, but I might have done an article on it just to convince Phil to use this TOML environment stuff that's now in Flyway available and not using the homegrown stuff Phil is taking.
Yes, well, exactly right. So I think I asked you, said like, show, everything's in version control. You're using environments. It all works beautifully. Let's have an article that shows how that all works. And at the time, Phil was more stuck in a sort of like, not stuck, but he had a kind of DIY way of doing environment. He had a framework.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, this is the thing about Phil. He kind of knows what's required. I'm not just managing. It's very easy if you've got one database, one developer. Do you know what I mean? One user. That's easy to manage. You just put all the details in a TOML file and you're kind of done. But if you've got many environments, multiple databases, lots of projects, and you want to do certain tasks on lots of them, you just want to run info on all of them and see what current state they're at. Or you want to do a certain task, but only on your staging environment database. That was actually reasonably difficult to do initially on Flyway. So Phil invented his own way of doing it. But the built-in way in Flyway is now robust enough and has been improved enough that Phil has seen the light. So he's abandoned his DIY technique and is using built-in Flyway TOML environments with resolvers to manage his environments, and it works. He's very happy with it.
It's a compliment actually for the Flyway team.
It's a compliment for the Flyway team. They brought out environments. We didn't quite get them. Well, certainly Phil didn't quite get how they could be useful in their initial state. They've improved them, and now here we are. He's writing a series of articles, which you saw.
Yeah, sorry, I scrolled already down.
There, yeah, just sorry, I was a bit slow explaining it all. But yeah, so this is like the third one in the series, really. So, and we reviewed the first two on Tony and Tony shows. You can probably find them in the YouTube archives about, what is TOML, what does it look like, what is its advantages over the old conf format, how do I convert my projects, and then introducing the idea of resolvers for secure programming. And now we're kind of hitting the road at this point. We're using environments. We're showing how to define not just multiple environments, but environments that behave differently depending on just how you set up those environments, how you configure them. And it was all done in one central place, and it makes team-based development a lot simpler. And that was a long-winded intro, but I hope you get the gist of what this is about.
No, it's a very good intro, Tony. And now I just scroll down to a simple Flyway environment configuration with a test and a development database.
Exactly. So you just put all this in your TOML file, and because in this example you're putting usernames, passwords in the TOML, this is clearly it's quite a simple setup. You'd have to have that file stored in your secure user area, and that's not ideal for team development. What you really want is to be able to, for each individual developer to have their own credentials stored securely in their Windows credential store. And then you use a resolver, if you scroll down to see that diagram, to pick up those credentials from the store at runtime. So you define multiple environments, then you add in resolvers to do it securely. And once you're doing that, there's no credentials in those TOML files. Suddenly, the TOML file is a project resource, you can share it. And suddenly
But
teamwork's a lot easier.
but he didn't stop there.
No.
And to be honest, I thought I knew a bit about these environments, but he goes one level higher, at least, than I am, because then he goes with some kind of nesting within the environments.
Well, that is right. So you have the environments namespace where you define your environments. So you'll have like environments.dev, that's your development environment. But then you have a nested namespace within that, which is environments.dev, in this case, .flyway, where you can set behaviors that are peculiar to that environment, that are distinct for that environment. And you can also use it to actually tweak what migrations run almost. You can adapt migration behavior depending on what this target database supports. What version of SQL Server you're running. You can get them to behave differently, but all from a single place and without having to repeat migration scripts or repeat configuration and copy and paste. None of that. It's all in one place, and all can be managed through version control.
But there's a little bit of small print here because there are a few things that can't be overwritten, right?
No. So that simple example, I'm getting a bit long-winded, but that was showing you like, okay, in the dev environment, as a default, clean is turned off. It's a destructive command. We don't want people cleaning databases. But actually in dev, clean disabled equals false. In our nested namespace, we can do that. So that's a simple example of an override.
But not everything is overwritten by the settings, right?
So you can, in theory, anything in the Flyway namespace could be overridden, extend, but in practice, no, you can't. Either because there are just some exceptions you can't override, or B, because it doesn't really make sense to try and do that. So and that's quite useful actually. So there's a bulleted list there of all the things you can't actually override, like configuration file paths, or they're in the Flyway namespace, but you can't override them.
No. And there's an official list Phil is talking about where all those exceptions are in, right?
Exactly. So the official list is in that first paragraph, and then he's going to say, but there are some other things as well that you can't do, just because it's just not. It kind of doesn't make sense for you to be able to do it. And then he really goes into he goes through some of the obvious advantages of being able to do this. Very simplified CLI commands. Once you've got all your configuration stored in one place securely, automation CI/CD pipelines becomes much easier. And then he goes into his example. He's talking about the practicalities of working with multiple environments, using user level versus TOML, project level TOMLs. The idea that you can generate, on top of that, you can generate configuration dynamically.
Mm-hmm.
And he gives the example of like you're working with a clone. Yeah.
Clone.
So, you're dealing with ephemeral environments. It becomes much simpler as well with this new setup. Because in the next article, you're going to see how you create an environment, it immediately updates your secure store with the new credentials, and then takes them out, runs Flyway. Generally, it becomes fairly seamless.
And to be honest, if you look at those CLI commands, they're they're cleaner than the examples Phil did normally in his article.
Exactly, it simplifies everything, and you get much more vastly simplified CLL commands. And then he does a fairly longer example here. So I mentioned the idea that you cannot just set Flyway, change Flyway settings on a per environment basis. You can actually do some fairly clever things like say, okay, we're going to use this. The example he gives is like there's a string ag function in SQL Server, but if you're not running, if the SQL Server isn't 2017 or later, it doesn't support it. But you can have one migration file that says essentially, and you're using placeholders here to say, if I can do string ag because I've detected you're a SQL Server 2017 or later, that's the version of the view I'll create. If you can't, I'm just going to use a technique that's going to work on every version of SQL Server.
Well, that's handy. Of course, there are some risks here because Phil is using this without a schema model folder, so no Flyway desktop setup
No.
I can spot over here, because I don't think those placeholders will work within a schema model. But still, a lot of Flyway users are using migration-based only, so not the hybrid way of working. And this is interesting.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, you'd have to use schema models in a particular way if you were doing stuff like this. Maybe you know what? I hadn't considered that. That's an interesting thought. I'll have a think about it. But yes, so again, you would have a default saying, like, if in doubt, use a version of this technique that will work anywhere. If I detected it yours 2017 or later, you can use a much neater string ag version. And that's all it is. Yeah, so you've got an environment placeholder here that just says it's generally false, but for here it's true.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, so Flyway placeholders 1 = 0. I'm going to use a safe default, but per environment, I can say, actually, no, this is fine here. We're going to have it as true.
It is an interesting example. It is a very interesting example.
And that's your migration script. It's all just one migration script, and it just adapts itself depending on what the environment placeholder, what value you have in it.
Yeah, so I scroll up again to the migration script, and to come back to my sneaky question. Of course, Flyway Desktop will compare the Flyway development database with the shadow database with all the migrations in there. So if your developer is using 2017, so without the string function, the shadow database and development database will look the same. So I think it might even work within Flyway Desktop.
It's an interesting thing to try out.
Yeah,
it's an interesting topic to raise.
So Phil, if you're listening,
try
it out, man.
Phil doesn't think like he's not prone to thinking. So what's the Flyway Desktop angle? He's very CLI man. He's a CLI man through and through. But yes, so there you go. It's quite a powerful technique if you're doing team development with Flyway, and you've got to manage multiple databases in different environments. You can do it securely and really simply now.
Well, I must be honest. I learned a thing or two on this 12 minutes we're now recording. It's the nesting, but also using these placeholders within a migration file to do this technique. It's interesting. I'm very curious what will come out of the other 2 articles, because there are 2 more in the series, right?
There are 2 more in the series. Yes, yes. There's some interesting one. There's the 4th one where he shows some slightly more spangly PowerShell techniques that you can use with this. And then a 5th one, which is quite funny about, I think it's a bit more lighthearted, I would suggest, but it's like you're switching between environments, and there's many ways you can set, you can set the environments at the project level, user level. You can send in a temporary config file on the command line. Are you certain you're in the environment you think you are? And it gets Flyway to color code and say, like, you are in production, just so you're aware.
So just like the SQL prompt tab coloring.
I didn't tell him to say that, but yeah, that was the exact inspiration for the 5th article.
But there will be for the next episode. So
yes, sorry, we're going on too long.
Yeah, we're going to close shop because we're at almost 14 minutes. So we're closing shop for episode 34.
Whoa.
And we see you all in episode 35.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.